50-50 split on a billion-dollar stadium redesign, but there are additional costs. What we learned last night about the city's deal with the Jags and what questions remain. Then, using scorched earth journalism to convey the urgency of climate change. We talked to the author of The Heat Will Kill You First, ahead of his reading in Jacksonville this weekend. And discovering and recovering from testicular cancer. We talk with Jumbo Shrimp CEO Ken Babby about his diagnosis and recovery. Plus, educating residents about Florida's Emancipation Day with a celebration at James Weldon Johnson Park. You can join our conversation on air by giving us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or reach out via Facebook, Instagram, or X. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Windsor Johnston. The Biden administration says it will provide an additional $2 billion in military aid to Ukraine. Speaking in Kyiv today, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the money will invest in Ukraine's industrial base.
We're rushing ammunition, armored vehicles, missiles, air defenses, rushing them to get to the front lines, to protect soldiers, to protect civilians. And on air defenses, as Dmytro said, this is, of course, a top priority.
During his unannounced trip to Ukraine, Blinken also said Washington has the power to seize Russian assets in the U.S. and will use them to help rebuild Ukraine. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals is set to hear arguments today in a case involving a controversial effort by Texas to crack down on illegal immigration. Houston Public Media's Andrew Schneider reports the case involves a floating wall the state has installed on the Rio Grande to keep people from entering the country from Mexico.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott ordered the installation of the 1,000-foot floating wall last summer as a part of the state's Operation Lone Star. Abbott says the border security effort is needed, claiming President Biden's immigration policies have caused illegal border crossings to skyrocket. The Justice Department sued, arguing that the barrier created safety and humanitarian concerns and that it interfered with the federal government's own border security efforts. Last December, a three-judge panel of the Fifth Circuit ordered Texas to remove the barrier. Abbott quickly requested a hearing before the court's full bench. For NPR News, I'm Andrew Schneider in Houston.
Cybersecurity researchers are tracking a new Chinese spying campaign aimed at the cargo and shipping industries. NPR's Jenna McLaughlin reports that's according to a new report on hacking activity in the last 6 months.
Between January and March of this year, researchers from cybersecurity company ESET have been tracking Chinese hackers targeting cargo ships. The researchers detected malware aimed at several European shipping companies, as well as on systems on cargo ships themselves. ESET's chief research officer, Roman Kovac, said the attacks are ongoing and demonstrate China's wide business and espionage interests.
In general, they are trying to get really dominant in maritime business and cargo ship business. They have a lot of investments in many European ports.
ESET researchers say the attacks are ongoing. They reflect China's efforts to expand its influence around the world. Jen McLaughlin, NPR News.
Inflation eased a bit last month. That's according to the latest report out this morning by the Labor Department. Consumer prices rose 3.4% for the 12 months ending in April. This is NPR News in Washington.
At 4 minutes after 9 o'clock, good morning. This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Jacksonville Mayor Donna Deegan and Jacksonville Jaguars team president Mark Lamping shared their vision for financing more than $1 billion in renovations to Everbank Stadium. The city and the football franchise have agreed to spend $625 million apiece to renovate Everbank Stadium over the course of 4 years. The city says it would not borrow money to fund the renovations. The Jaguars would pay for any cost overruns. Mayor Donna Deegan says the team is never going to leave Jacksonville as long as she serves as the city's chief executive.
These are the types of things that if we invest in right now, and then the Jaguars continue to invest in for 30 years, there's no limit to what we'll be able to do downtown.
A community huddle on this plan is tonight, the first one of several. It's at 6 o'clock at Mandarin High School. Ability Housing broke ground this week on a new community with 90 apartments at Harlow Boulevard and 103rd Street. 72 apartments will be set aside for families earning up to $58,000 annually, and the rest will be for families earning up to $29,000. The complex, with a community center, a computer lab, library, and other amenities, will be funded with state and federal money, plus a $1 million grant from the city of Jacksonville. Morning showers and thunderstorms for us today in Northeast Florida. Temperature now 76 degrees.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Charles Schwab, offering investors choices like full-service wealth management, advice, investing, and trading on thinkorswim. Learn more at schwab.com. And the listeners who support this NPR station.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, a $1.7 billion deal that includes a Jaguars stadium facelift is now before the City Council. We explore what we learned during last night's unveiling of this historic deal and what lies ahead. Later in the program, we talk to the author of The Heat Will Kill You First, ahead of his Jacksonville Public Library reading, and Jumbo Shrimp CEO Ken Babby opens up about his recent cancer diagnosis. But first, the cost of keeping the Jaguars in Jacksonville now has a price tag. Last night, the City Council heard for the first time the terms of a stadium renovation deal between the city and the Jaguars. And here to help us break it all down is Florida Times Union Metro reporter David Bauerlein. David, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, Ann.
So, David, last night the team and the mayor presented their negotiated deal to the Jacksonville City Council to finance the Stadium of the Future, as well as some other amenities in that area. There's two elements I want to discuss: the lease and kind of the building, like what we'll be getting, and then the financing, which is a lot more complicated.
Of course.
So tell us what we know about how the physical structure is going to look and how it's going to change.
Yeah, it'll be a renovation, but it's really going to look like an almost entirely new stadium. There will be this big metallic mirror-like reflective covering around the outside, which is going to kind of give it an interesting vibe, different vibe from other NFL stadiums as well. There's going to be a roof, so in the early season games, people aren't going to be broiling in the sun. There's going to be wider concourses, so there's going to be less jostling when you're walking around in that area of the stadium. There will be some features like a tropical garden you'll go through. It's going to be better views, I think, from the seats in terms of feeling like you're closer to the action. So the fan experience is going to be much better for those who like going to Jaguars games and enjoy that particular spectacle of the NFL.
And it sounds like, in terms of just getting around the stadium, a lot more elevators, a lot more escalators, a lot more bathrooms, which I'm sure fans will appreciate.
Very much so. I mean, it's going to be some of those basic upgrades that just make it a more enjoyable experience to go to an NFL game and watch the Jaguars play, as well as any other events that might be taking place there during the course of the year.
So this lease deal would also lock in the team, and also it discusses how many games they'll play at home versus away or abroad. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it would be a 30-year lease. There would be some damages, which haven't really been specified if the Jaguars were to try to leave before 30 years, but there really would be the idea they're there for 30 years. And then in terms of games at home, it's a little bit murkier. Right now, the Jaguars do play one game pretty much every season in London. That's become kind of a traditional home away from home for them. So the lease would allow them to continue to do that one game each year in London. And there's also this idea that maybe every 4 years, the NFL might ask the Jaguars to play a second home game away from Jacksonville, and that would be an option the Jaguars could look at. And, they play these international games in London. They play them in Germany. They play them in Brazil. They play them in Mexico. So that part, I'm sure, is going to get a lot of discussion and debate by City Council about whether 2 home games away in any season is one too many, or if they agree to that latitude or flexibility for the team.
And then it looks like maybe they would just be out of the stadium for 1 year, possibly playing in Gainesville for that year during the construction.
Yeah, or Camping World Stadium on Orlando is the other option. But yes, it looks like the 2027 season, the construction would just make the stadium off limits. 2026, they would still be able to play there, but with fewer seats.
All right, so buckle up. I want to talk about the money because it's complicated. So I said at the beginning a $1.7 billion overall cost. As you note, that's part of that is for the stadium, and perhaps not fair to include some of the money that I'm tackling into that. But basically the breakdown is $925 million the city would foot in total. The Jaguars in total would put up $775 million. And basically the stadium cost would be split, but there's these additional costs and projects around the stadium. So tell us a little bit about why those are included and what the reaction has been so far to those projects.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the $1.4 billion is the cost of actually doing the stadium, and 55% of that would come from the city, 45% from the Jaguars. Then there's and that's that portion of the deal really is kind of in the mainstream of what other NFL stadiums have done, is actually a lower percentage share for taxpayers than some other deals. Then there's another $300 million for what they call a community benefits agreement. It's kind of a side agreement, and basically the Jaguars would agree over 30 years to put up a total of $150 million. It would go towards, things like affordable housing, workforce development, neighborhood improvements, including for the East Side neighborhood that's right across the Matthews Bridge Expressway from the sports complex. The city would agree to put up $150 million over a shorter time frame, like maybe about 5 years, and that would go towards some of those similar programs, as well as tens of millions of dollars towards developing this chain of riverfront parks, including Riverfront Plaza, where the Jacksonville Landing used to be, the Shipyards West project, which is just vacant, sort of ugly land right now, and Metropolitan Park, which is a longstanding park that definitely could use some additional attention. And so the Jaguars really like the idea of the parks because that's also where Shad Khan is building a Four Seasons hotel and residence.
On either side of those.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the community benefits agreement is way bigger than what other NFL deals have had in terms of the commitment from the team over 30 years. And for the first time ever, having the city actually agree within that framework to put up a certain amount of money. There's already been some pushback on the city doing $150 million. Should it be done as part of this agreement? Should it be evaluated as part of all the other budget needs they have, which are numerous across the whole city? So I think there's going to be a lot of scrutiny on that, and it may or may not get support from City Council for the $150 million by the city. If it doesn't, then what happens with the Jaguars' $150 million commitment? They didn't really say. They just want to talk to council, but some council members said their understanding is the Jaguars should just go back to $100 million for their commitment over 30 years. So is it worth it to get $50 million more from the Jaguars in exchange for committing to do these projects that the mayor is really gung-ho about? Or do you kind of back off and say, not so fast, Mayor?
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, even before the plan was laid out before the council, city council member Rory Diamond was tweeting saying, nothing was negotiated. The city only added additional costs for us, so pushing back on that idea before it was even really made public for the public.
Yeah, and his prediction is the council won't go along with it. So I don't know whether that's the case or not. Ron Salem, the city council president, talked about it with reporters yesterday and basically said, yes, he thinks there are some questions, concerns about the community development portion. He's not saying he's against it, but that's something they're going to have a lot of questions about. He even suggested that it's possible that they will do a stadium deal, vote on that, possibly before the end of June, and then maybe the community benefits agreement waits a little bit longer, and maybe it comes, July gets a vote on that, or after they come back for their summer recess. So there's a lot of moving parts and pieces in that, but it could boil down to if the city council agrees that those are good programs, that they want to do the parks, they want to do affordable housing, they want to do workforce development, and the Jaguars will give them $50 million extra to commit to that within this agreement, then it's an easy yes. If they don't agree with those priorities, it's a tougher sell.
A couple of comments from Caitlin on email. She's saying, I truly cannot believe the city council is considering putting forth $500 million towards the stadium. We're talking about closing schools. There was some, presence last night at the council on that. Bill emailed that the community benefit agreement is a key part of the deal and providing funding for affordable housing. So that's an important comment. I've got to take a quick call here from Eric in Arlington. Eric, if you can be very, very brief, please.
I will. The money from the quote-unquote Jaguars is a misnomer. They're not paying for half of this. All the money is coming from Jacksonville. Where do the Jaguars get their money? Ticket sales, jersey sales, TV contract, and all this money comes from the city of Jacksonville. Thank you for taking my call.
Thanks, Eric. And I mean, there's so much to talk about in the financing, and we don't have a ton of time. But a lot of this money is basically coming from a shift of the Better Jacksonville Plan dollars and moving some projects back into the city's capital improvement program. It isn't coming as like a bill as much as a shifting of dollars.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's something the council will look at very closely as well. Basically, the big picture is in 2000, voters approved a half-cent sales tax for the Better Jacksonville Plan. A big list of projects were done. It was a 30-year tax. It will end at the end of 2030. The Curry administration was looking at ending it sooner and having it end 4 years sooner, so that then this other half-cent sales tax, which voters agreed to a few years ago to pay down pension debt, could get sped up. And that's kind of the play there. How do you do those two taxes? What's the timing of them? And how does that free up money that could be used for the stadium?
David Bauerlein, thank you so much for coming in for this morning's debrief. I'm going to make you come back again to talk more about the money when we have a little more time, but really appreciate it. And up next, using scorched earth journalism to convey the urgency of climate change. And later, Jumbo Shrimp CEO Ken Babby talks about his battle with testicular cancer. Welcome back. I'm joined now by Rolling Stone contributor and author of 7 works of environmental nonfiction, Jeff Goodell. Welcome, Jeff. Glad to have you on the program.
Hi, happy to be here.
So you're coming to town for a reading this Saturday at the Jacksonville Public Library to talk about your most recent book. It's called The Heat Will Kill You First, Life and Death on a Scorched Planet. There's no mystery to that title or in your writing style, for that matter. Why is it important to speak in such frank language about this issue?
That's a great question. I mean, I think one of the problems with how many of us think about climate change and the risks of climate change and the world we're living in now is that we talk about climate change as if it's some sort of distant, faraway event, something that is happening to glaciers, in Antarctica, or to future generations, or people who live on the other side of the planet. There's not enough sort of immediacy about how it's affecting us here and now. And one of the things about extreme heat is that it does affect us here and now. One of the things that I discovered in reporting of this book is how quickly heat can kill you. And I wanted to kind of communicate the immediacy of this risk and of how our planet is changing and what it means to you and me, and not so much to people on the other side of the world.
So you talk about how people are sometimes conditioned to downplay the effects of extreme heat because they have the luxury of air conditioning, and that they're able to regard extreme heat as kind of an avoidable personal hazard. But you think that this creates a dangerous cycle, not just in thinking about these things, but practically speaking, in terms of how the planet is warming and the way that air conditioning contributes to that.
Yeah, I mean, air conditioning is obviously a really important invention. I mean, Florida would not be Florida if it were not for the invention of air conditioning. It's certainly a useful tool for adaptation, but let's be frank. There billions of people on this planet who do not have air conditioning, and for all intents and purposes will never have air conditioning. There are, tens of thousands of people in Jacksonville who do not have air conditioning, and for all intents and purposes won't have air conditioning. Furthermore, we're not going to sort of, air condition our oceans. We're not going to air condition our forests. We're not going to air condition the fields where our food crops grow. So air conditioning kind of gives us this illusion that heat is something that we can sort of simply manage, that there's a sort of a techno fix for. And that's not really true. It certainly aids in personal comfort, but it also kind of creates a bubble of delusion around us about what's really going on in our world.
So one of the concerns, I guess, too, is aside from it sort of isolating us from what's truly happening on the planet and all of the impacts it's going to have on other life forms or people who don't have air conditioning, is that it is dependent on a power grid that is increasingly unstable for a variety of reasons, not least climate change.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as our cities and our world heats up, more and more people are acquiring air conditioning, which is putting more and more strain on our grid. I live in Texas, in Austin, Texas, right now, and every time there's a hot day, we get warnings from our power company about possible brownouts or restricted electricity supply. And the consequences of this demand really exponentially raise the risks of blackouts on hot days. And if you have a blackout in Jacksonville on a day where you have a heat index of 100 degrees, and that blackout lasts more than an hour or two, which is certainly possible. We had a blackout for 5 days here in Austin, in Texas, in the middle of winter a couple of years ago. That becomes a life-threatening event. I mean, people after a few hours, during a blackout on a hot day, will die. I mean, there was a very powerful study done 2 years ago in Phoenix about what would happen with a 48-hour blackout in Phoenix on a hot summer day. And basically, the study came to the conclusion that half the population of Phoenix, half the population, almost 500,000 people, would end up seeking emergency care at the hospitals, and tens of thousands of people would die. So air conditioning is a kind of technological illusion that can be taken away from us at any moment.
Those numbers really are extraordinary and truly alarming to think of the need that there would exist if there was a power outage. And of course, there's not just storms that are increasing that can knock out power, but things like cyber attacks. And so our grid is perhaps more vulnerable, our power grid, than it's really ever been.
Yeah, and also, heat actually taxes the grid itself more than just sort of the power demand. It also causes wires to sag as they expand. It puts more strain on the mechanics of the power plants, natural gas plants, and coal plants. One of the great ironies of this is that, solar especially performs particularly well during these kinds of heat waves. And one of the things that has saved the Texas grid during these extreme heat events that we've been having here in the last couple summers is the, exponentially increasing creation of solar energy, which is much less vulnerable to disruption during these hot events than, say, natural gas plants.
So it's an issue that really could hardly be more urgent, but one that sometimes takes second place to topics like sea level rise, which, in fact, your previous book was called The Water Will Come, Rising Seas, Sinking Cities, and the Remaking of the Civilized World. There's so many challenges. Is there a hierarchy in your mind of the most problematic?
Well, first of all, let me just say I was in Jacksonville for Irma in 2017. I spent a lot of time thinking about sea level rise, and as you mentioned, wrote a whole book about it. And they're both real threats to a place like Jacksonville, but they're threats in very different ways. Sea level rise is a kind of long-term, slow-moving but persistent change in the relationship between the water and the land. No one stands on the beach and sort of drowns suddenly because of sea level rise. It can have impacts on storm surges, it can change flooding patterns, but it has a lot of impact on real estate, on infrastructure, on things like that, on sanitation, lots of infrastructure aspects. But as a threat to human health per se, in an immediate sense, it's not a big threat. It's one of these sort of long-term impacts that will have cause very big changes in a place like Jacksonville, but not tomorrow. Heat is very different. Heat doesn't really have much of effect on infrastructure. Certainly, some things like bridges and things that are made of certain kinds of metals and highways there can be some impacts on infrastructure, but it's really about human health. It's about mortality. It's about death. It's about people who are vulnerable, people who don't have access to air conditioning, people who live in houses and buildings who don't have access to air conditioning, dying as a result of heat. So it's a much more personal and much more visceral and much more immediate consequence of climate change than sea level rise is.
And I want to return a little bit to the issue of how you word things and how you phrase things. I mean, you're a great writer. You've said that heat has kind of a branding problem, and that phrases that we use, things like global warming, sound almost gentle, like we're going to get better beach weather. Is the way that you are trying to approach these issues a deliberate effort to try to, redefine some of the terms that we use, or the way that we have grown to accept these terms as something less threatening than they are?
Yeah, I mean, I say that explicitly in the book, that I really am setting out to help the reader kind of redefine the idea of heat and redefine the risks of heat. And it's a real issue. I mean, to be frank, I wrote about climate change for 20 years. I wrote 6 books, and including the sea level rise book we were discussing. And I never really myself understood the sort of urgency of heat and the danger and the real risks of heat until I happened to be in Phoenix on a really hot day, missed my Uber, and ran 20 blocks on a 115-degree day to a meeting and just about passed out. And I realized, oh my gosh, if I ran another 20 blocks, I would have been in really big trouble. And it occurred to me then that, how dangerous heat really is. And part of it is that it's invisible, right? You look out the window, there's a hurricane coming. You look out the window, palm trees are swaying. It's very obvious, the risks of, say, a hurricane. You look out the window. Today, I'm sitting here in my office in Texas. I look out the window, I can't tell if it's 70 degrees or 120 degrees out there visually. So we have no sort of visual clues about it. And the media does a bad job of talking about it also. When a heat wave is coming, news shows will often show people, at the beach or playing in fountains. And in addition to all that, a lot of people like warmer weather. I mean, that's the story of Florida in a way, right? I mean, I live in Texas. Most people, I think the sort of population demographics in America have shown, would rather live in Jacksonville than in, say, Duluth or something. So there's this sort of instinctive, sort of love of warmer weather. But what we don't understand is how that sort of love of warmer weather and the risks of heat changes very, very quickly. And that heat, I call it, like in my book, a kind of predatory force, and that it really puts people who are most vulnerable at risk very quickly.
And, we're talking about places like Texas and Florida, which obviously are hotter than other places right now. But you write about how there are places that are considered far more temperate that are experiencing these catastrophic heat waves, including in 2003 in Paris. Remind us what happened and why things were so exacerbated by the infrastructure there.
Well, the heat wave that hit Paris in 2003 was, one of the hallmarks of climate change is these extreme events, right? That we talk about sort of general warming of our world. We talk about numbers like 1.5 C or 2 C, which is translated into Fahrenheit, 2 or 3 degrees of warming, and it sounds like no big deal. But one of the hallmarks of climate change is more and more extreme events, and the heat wave in Paris in 2003 was an example of that. It was a summer of temperatures far above normal, relentless for I think 3 weeks. And one of the problems is in a place like Paris is that it is not designed for that kind of heat. No one is prepared for it. In Florida and in Texas, where you live, where I live, we have some knowledge of heat. We're used to dealing with it. Our infrastructure in some ways, and for better or for worse, is built for it. There in Paris, it is not. Virtually nobody had air conditioning. You have these 18th century, the inner city is built with these 18th century buildings that have these tin roofs that act like convection ovens. And when this heat wave hit, nobody knew what to do. You had people living in these garret apartments under these tin roofs without any ventilation or air conditioning. Many of them were older people. And 30,000 people died in a matter of a few weeks, and it was a brutal example of just how deadly these kinds of extreme events can be.
And so places like that, are working for some local solutions. You write about, changing some of those iconic rooftops into terraces, would sort of transform the way that heat penetrates those buildings. But there are limits on what any individual place can do when you're talking about a global transformation like this.
Right, and I really go out of my way in the book, in the last chapter of the book, to talk about Paris is ironically one of the cities in the world that is doing the most right now to really adapt to this hotter world that we live in, and that means things like shutting off the inner city to traffic and bringing planting a lot of trees, a lot of green infrastructure, cleaning up the Seine so that people can swim in it. So we have these sort of public cooling areas. Paris is really kind of one of the sort of global leaders in showing how we can transform a city, especially an iconic city like that, into a more hospitable space. But as you point out, the real issue here is, the world is heating up because we're continuing to burn fossil fuels. That is why cities like Jacksonville, cities like Austin, cities like Paris are all getting hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. And yes, we can do some things to adapt. We can have better building insulation, more trees, more canopy, more shade, more public spaces with cooling air, access to cooling. But ultimately, our world is going to continue getting hotter and hotter and hotter until we stop burning fossil fuels. And when you want to think about what we're going to do about this and how we're going to adapt to this, the first adaptation is to stop burning fossil fuels.
These are difficult subjects, I think, for people to hear sometimes and to think about. Are they difficult personally for you to tackle?
Yeah, they are. But, I've been writing about climate change for a long time, more than 20 years. And people ask me, like, why am I not, living in my basement, scrawling with crayons on the wall about, how depressing, our world is and the future that we're creating for ourselves. And I actually find it quite inspiring. I am not a doomer in any sense. I really believe that, this transformation that we're going through because of climate change. And let me be clear that we're not going back. One of the things that people misunderstand often about climate change is they think that if we get off of fossil fuels and we're going to go back to the world, the kind of temperatures and world that we all kind of grew up in, and that's not true. We're moving into a completely different era. But one of the interesting things about this is that because of these changes that are already underway, it means that everything that we do is going to be different in the future. We're going to build cities differently. We're going to drive different kinds of cars. We're going to eat food that grows in different kinds of places. We're going to think differently about our politics. It's everything is sort of up for grabs here. And I find that to be really inspiring because I meet so many people who kind of get this and are working hard to sort of build a better world. And I think that, the climate crisis, as terrible as it is, and as much sort of loss and suffering as it is going to bring with it, it is also going to bring with it a chance to reinvent our world and make it a sort of better, more just place. And I think Jacksonville is a really clear example of that. Jacksonville is not, in 50 years, is going to look nothing like the Jacksonville that we're looking at today.
Well, Jeff Goodell, author of The Heat Will Kill You First, he'll be in town on May 18th, which is the Saturday at 2 o'clock. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll be right back. Welcome back. In addition to being the owner of Jacksonville's minor league baseball team, Ken Babby is a cancer survivor and a health advocate. Just a little over 1 year ago, Ken Babby was diagnosed with testicular cancer. He joins me now to discuss that and his recovery. Welcome, Ken.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
It is so nice to have you. We're also joined by Dr. Lael Stieglitz, a urologist at Baptist MD Anderson Cancer Center. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Ken, cancer is a deeply personal disease for anyone, but certain kinds of cancer seem to make it just to be more difficult to discuss, and particularly testicular cancer for men. Was it hard for you to begin speaking publicly about it?
Initially, I'd say yes, but when I thought about it, I realized just how important it was. At the end of the day, right, talking about our own, medical situations, particularly something as sensitive as testicular cancer, it's a personal thing. And I pretty quickly realized that, if there was anything I could do to bring some awareness to it and to help others in any way, I was interested to do that. I for one was really fortunate. My journey and case with this was, a positive one, but that's not the case for everybody. And so I want to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to pay it forward.
Dr. Stieglitz, this may seem like an obvious question, but what is testicular cancer?
Sure, testicular cancer is a tumor of the testicles, usually one-sided, and it is malignant and has to be treated.
Okay. There are no benign testicular cancers?
There are some, yes,
Okay.
but that's more rare.
Okay. So these are cells that are growing and multiplying, kind of how we think cancer is elsewhere in the
Yeah,
body.
exactly.
Okay. And so how common is it?
So it is the most common solid malignancy for young men. So number one in the age group, 20 to 40-year-olds. And then when you look overall, because we have so much more cancer in older patients, it is a rare cancer in general. Last year in America, there were about 9,500 new cases among all men, which breaks down to just about 6.5 per 100,000, or about 1 in 10,000.
Okay. So that is fairly infrequent. There are some statistics I've seen that show that it's more common in Caucasian men.
Yes, that's true. And it's been increasing over the last several decades. Our data shows it is becoming more prevalent, and we do not know why.
There's a lot of environmental endocrine disruptors out there. I mean, is this one of those things that's kind of getting attention as a possible environmental cause?
I don't know if we're looking into that, but I'm sure people are doing that kind of research. I haven't heard yet.
Mm-hmm. Is there a history of this in terms of a family history that plays a role?
The number one risk factor we know is being born with undescended testicles. So testicles are supposed to be in the scrotum, and there are some genetic conditions, or even some children who are just born and the testicle hasn't descended yet. And that's a risk factor for getting testicular cancer later. And we think that's probably because of temperature regulation and just something has happened abnormally in development.
Okay. And so we talk about different stages of cancer, stage one being the most, kind of the initial stage, right?
Mm-hmm.
How easy is it to detect a cancer at that stage, a testicular cancer?
It's most commonly found as stage 1 or stage 2. And as far as how easy it is, it really depends on the patient. But I've never had a testicular cancer patient who didn't come to me and said, I never felt a mass. They've always felt a lump or something different, and that's how you find it.
What's the difference between a mass and a lump?
It's just a different word.
Okay.
I said mass sounds big and scary. Sometimes it's small and subtle.
What are some of the symptoms of testicular cancer that people can look for or just should be aware of?
Usually it's just a different finding on exam. You're taking a shower and something feels different on one side compared to the other. Some guys have told me they felt pain. Some guys, and these are my saddest stories, the ones I'll remember forever, developed a chronic cough and started losing weight. And they had testicular cancer all the way in their lungs. And I had a guy I saw recently who had back pain, and it's because he had advanced testicular cancer that was involving lymph nodes in his back. So that's very rare, those stories. In general, it is something you find on self-exam.
Are reproductive organs, or those that are kind of affiliated with reproduction like breasts, are they more prone to cancer than other organs?
Not that I know of. I don't think I would make that statement.
Okay. Ken, you did a video recently. It was Testicular Cancer Awareness Month in April. And I want to listen to a little bit of that and then talk to you about it.
I was instantly scared. I knew it wasn't supposed to feel or look the way that it did, and I knew I needed help. I shared with my wife Liz that I was concerned. I called my parents who live out in Phoenix, Arizona, and woke them both up to share with them what I had discovered, and I immediately knew I needed help.
So Ken, it sounds like that really was, a dramatic and difficult moment, and scary, as you say. Did you know what you were facing before you contacted a doctor?
I want to put it in a little bit of perspective in that so many families and so many people deal with really scary things, right? We'll just sort of non-medical term, but really scary things. And for me, this was a scary moment. My life, I am incredibly blessed. I have a healthy family. I am, beyond fortunate to come to work at not one but two baseball stadiums every day, and work with the best and the brightest in the country in what we do. And so, I wake up very, very fortunate and very blessed. And when this occurred on that morning, I was really scared. But I will tell you that even scared as I was and my family was, there was an instant confidence, I think, and maybe it's just sort of part of who I am and how I was raised. I just knew in my heart that it was going to be okay. Now, I didn't have any data or medical, knowledge of that, and thank God, I had the ability to see Dr. Stieglitz as quickly as I did. But, I realize other people's journeys are not the same, and they're far more complicated with many more headwinds than I had. But it was a very scary moment. There's no question about it, and I think in some ways it was scarier for my family than it was for me, because I just had an inner confidence that whatever it was, whatever I was, forced to deal with, we would take it head on, and that's exactly what we did.
I don't know if you're comfortable talking about the kind of treatment that you received, but you did have a good outcome. Is that correct?
I did. I had surgery and had the testicle removed. I don't have any issues discussing it, and have been completely healthy since then, and continue to feel great, and just amazingly grateful for the care and support and the diagnosis from Dr. Stieglitz, who really did truly drop everything to help me figure out the kind of support I needed, and put me on a winning path. And I will always be grateful for her and the Baptist team for the rest of my life for doing that. And I'm sure he sees many patients all through the day, all through the week. But she really changed my life, and I will always be grateful for that.
Well, it's so great about your good outcome and your good diagnosis. Dr. Stieglitz, what are treatment options when someone has testicular cancer?
The first treatment is taking out the testicle with the cancer in it. That is, it doesn't matter if you come and it's all over your body, we still take that testicle out. We have to get out the offending tumor. And then if it's stage 1, hopefully you don't need anything else. You do need surveillance, you need monitoring, and then it depends on what type of testicular cancer it is. There's generally 2 broad categories, but if it is beyond stage 1, sometimes you need 1 round of chemo, sometimes you need several, and sometimes you need surgery to remove potential lymph nodes in the area of your body called the retroperitoneum.
Is chemotherapy, radiation, are those commonly used in this kind of cancer?
Not radiation, chemotherapy can be, yes.
And how about targeted? You kind of hear about proton therapy. Is that something used for this or no?
Not here, because we call it, when cancer spreads, we talk about landing zones where the cancer cells land to, and it's a pretty broad area for testicular cancer, so you need chemotherapy to really get in and get into those cells, or a big surgery to remove all of them.
Yeah. So Ken, you have had a successful experience with Dr. Stieglitz. What do you tell people who today are diagnosed with this kind of cancer that you think is helpful about your experience?
Well, the first thing I would say to people, and is check yourself, right? And for me, as I shared in my story, it was in the shower after playing tennis with my son, and just something didn't look right, didn't feel right. But I can tell you, I think a lot of guys, and I'll speak for myself, we just kind of go about our day, right? We get in the shower, we shave, we put on our clothes, we go to the gym, we go to work, we come home, we have dinner, and we're all in sort of this cycle. We're all busy. Everybody's got a lot on their plate. Life, pulls us in multiple directions. And sometimes the last thing that we give time to is ourselves. And, I've been guilty about it in other health areas where I, should have seen a doctor to get something checked out. We've all done it. It's not uncommon. And if I made that same decision with this medical issue, I could have had a very different outcome. So what I would say first of all, and I'm not one to preach, often, but I'd say if you see something in your body in any way that doesn't feel right or doesn't look right, go see a doctor. We have incredible care in our community throughout Northeast Florida, and it's really important to do that. So that's the first thing I'd say. And the second thing is, we live in such a remarkable time, right, where there's such remarkable innovation in the medical space that if you're responsible and you do go get checked, you're putting yourself in the best statistical probability for success by putting your case in the hands of doctors like Dr. Stieglitz that have the tools and have the clearly the knowledge to be able to know how to respond to these things. And that wasn't always the case. I met a woman at the ballpark a week and a half ago who had heard that we were doing testicular cancer awareness and told me the story of a cousin that passed 30 years ago because there weren't the types of tools that we have today, and he didn't get checked and waited too long. So I don't think those stories are meant to scare anybody. That's not the intent. But if you see something on your body and it doesn't look right, go get it checked out.
Yeah. How often, Dr. Stieglitz, should people be giving themselves a self-exam?
It's a tough question because urologists actually shy away from counseling men to do self-exams. We used to really preach that, and then we've kind of stopped that. And I think men were scaring themselves because there are lots of normal things that might feel different down there. So this is kind of a loaded question, but there's cysts, there's swelling, there's fluid, there's things that are totally benign and not cancer that you might feel if you start really paying attention to yourself. So there's this fine balance of not becoming a hypochondriac and, checking every lump and bump, but then also, hey, this really doesn't feel right. I need someone to help me check this out. And a lot of men, you can start with your primary cares, right? And you can get an ultrasound, you can have an exam, you can have someone take another look and either offer you reassurance or say, let's go see somebody else about this.
Yeah. Well, Ken Babby, Dr. Lael Stieglitz, thank you so much, both of you, for being here and talking about this.
Yeah. Thank you, too.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You bet. And we'll be right back.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
20 minutes of reading a day paves the way to success, and we can make reading a game. Read game instructions together or go on letter scavenger hunts throughout the day. Remember, it all adds up to 20 minutes.
For more information, read jax.org.
A multiracial coalition helped Democrats win Georgia by a slim margin in the 2020 election. But now some of those base voters are reluctant to vote for Biden again.
4 years later, the issues still remain. In fact, some of them have exacerbated to crisis conditions.
Biden's path to winning Georgia and why it might not look the same as it did 4 years ago. More on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Starting at 4 on WJCT News 89.9.
On the next Fresh Air, the militias of the Middle East, their roles in the war between Israel and Hamas, and the power they exert in their home countries. Our guest will be Greg Karlstrom, who covers the Middle East for The Economist. We'll also talk about how the Middle East's oldest conflict has entered a new era. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
Romantasy is one of the fastest growing genres right now. It blends elements of fantasy, like quests and magic, with elements of romance, think enemies to lovers. But these stories are more than escapist tales. What can Romantasy teach us about loving fiercely and staying hopeful against all odds? Dragons, magic, warlocks, and love. That's next time on 1A.
Today starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
And we're back. This Sunday marks the 159th anniversary of the emancipation of enslaved people in Florida. Emancipation Day is celebrated in Florida on May 20th, a month before the federal holiday of Juneteenth. Here to tell us why and what to expect this weekend, I'm joined now by Jacksonville City Councilwoman Jacoby Pittman, who is presenting the event. Welcome, Jacoby.
Well, thank you, Ann. Thank you so much.
So nice to have you. And Adonica Toller, local historian and museum director for the Clara White Mission. Hi, Adonica. Welcome back.
Greetings. Thank you for having me back.
So, Councilwoman Pittman, what is the purpose of this weekend's event?
Well, the purpose, one, is to educate the community about the Emancipation Proclamation, but it's a 2-day event. We kick off on Sunday at 4:30 in the James Weldon Johnson Park. And on Monday, we're actually doing the celebration at City Hall in the atrium. And so we started this 4 years ago, and we're excited. We're growing so much, and we want the community to come out and hear about the history. So it's a festival where it's a family event, and we have entertainment with Rockman Johnson, who is also a city councilman. He's going to host the event. We have the Cats Downstairs, who's providing the entertainment, and they've been with us for several years now. And then we also have poets Love Rain and Mel Jones, and it's an opportunity to embrace our history. Although things that have happened in the past, it's ugly. And it's an opportunity to bring the community together to understand about what slavery was about, you know. And a lot of times we don't like to talk about those things that have been an injustice in our community. But we're not only talking about the emancipation for Jacksonville, but also the state of Florida and how we've come together, and we're going to acknowledge this day on May the 20th.
And Adonica, remind us why Florida celebrates this a month prior to Juneteenth, which is when the nation celebrates emancipation.
So after General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses Grant, the generals were sent out to the various states. So various generals were sent to each state to go to the Capitol to announce and enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. And for Florida, it was May 20th, 1865. General McCook
was the general, and he read the Emancipation Proclamation at the Knott House in Tallahassee, Florida. So for Florida, it's May 20th. It's not Juneteenth. And I believe in Georgia, it's two. It can be January 1st because of General Sherman already controlled Savannah, Georgia, and then also April 8th or so. So each state has a different day that a general arrived to the Capitol to read the Emancipation Proclamation and enforce it in 1865. So every southern state that had been a state of the rebellion, they each have a different date that they celebrate the Emancipation Proclamation.
And important to note that the emancipation really only impacted southern states, Confederate states. It did not impact northern states.
It did not. It did not affect the 4 slave states that stayed with the Union, which was Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, and Missouri. So they were allowed to keep their slaves, so the Emancipation Proclamation did not apply to them.
When did it become, if you know, universally illegal to own other people?
Universally illegal is December 6th, 1865.
Okay. So I want to ask, this is the 4th annual celebration that we've done in this city of Emancipation Day. Is there more interest? Is there a reason why more recently it's been something recognized and celebrated by the city?
Well, it was because I'd asked my city council members at that time if they would support it, because actually the emancipation was supported by the governor 4 years ago. And there is a young woman named Altamise Barnes who runs the Raleigh House in Tallahassee. And for years, she has been working with cities throughout Florida to get the correct information out about the emancipation. And so 4 years ago, it was supported by the state, and she requested every city in the state of Florida to consider supporting it. So Jacksonville and the mayor, Curry, at that time supported it. The city council passed legislation regarding the support of emancipation because it had never been done. And of course, as Adonica said, it was really announced in Jacksonville first before it was announced in Tallahassee. Is that correct?
Correct. So the twist to the story is the Emancipation Proclamation was actually read January 1st, 1863 in St. Augustine, Jacksonville, Key West, and Pensacola, because the Union troops controlled the state. So there's a January 1st celebration as well.
Well, the event starts Sunday, May 19th at James Weldon Johnson Park from 4 to 8. Jacoby Pittman, Adonica Toller, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And join us again tomorrow when City Council President Ron Salem joins us to discuss the city's deal for a renovated Jaguars Stadium. I'm Ann Schindler, and you've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info